Welcome into another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. This is a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition. I am your host, Benjamin Wolk. As always, here with Jordan D. Hill. And per usual with one of these June episodes, another loaded show with plenty to talk about. We've got some news, 2 new commitments, 1 big flip, 1 big offensive lineman. It is that time of year in the Georgia recruiting world. We will look back at last weekend's official visit weekend, as we have been all month long, and we'll be looking ahead to next weekend's official visit weekend as well. We also have about 10 minutes one-on-one with Georgia's first 2027 commit, wide receiver Gavin Honore from Mater Dei High School in California. And per usual, we will talk about around the country, arrow pointing up, and predict a commit. It is going to be a loaded show. This is my first episode. For those watching, you'll see this is my first episode not wearing glasses, or my first Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition not wearing glasses. But for whatever reason, Jordan's decided to throw his own glasses on here. What's going on here, Jordan?
Well, I felt like there's got to be probably like a glasses gang out there. Like there's a small contingent that are upset, Ben, that you have abandoned the glasses. So I thought for the start of the show I'd throw mine on just so they didn't feel left out. But hey, let all the people know how you're doing after that LASIK surgery and how you're feeling.
No, things are great. The vision's great. I'm sitting here staring perfectly at everything in front of me with no glasses on. For the people watching at home, they're probably thinking I'm completely overhauling my look because I'm wearing a hat for the first time ever on one of these things. It's not something you should probably get accustomed to, but I still can't get water in my eyes. So I haven't been able to wash my hair the way that I need to, and nobody needed to really deal with seeing that if you do happen to be watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. So, yeah, but things are all good, and I couldn't be happier about how the LASIK surgery went.
Super, super glad it went all right for you, and happy you got it done, and we can talk some recruiting.
I think I did it. I made enough comments about it on this show over the last month to avoid any, I was trying to reverse jinx it. I was doing Friday the 13th, big Georgia official visit weekend. It felt like it was just stars aligning for something terrible to happen. But no, I've got my final, actually, as people are listening to this, I'll be doing my 1 week post-op, and hopefully I'll be fully cleared to do a lot of things that I want to be doing, like getting out on the golf course and, other things that I would like to be doing with my perfect vision now as well. But enough about me. This isn't about me. It's not about me, obviously, Jordan. It's called the Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show. I would never be narcissistic enough to make it about me. Let's get into the news in the Georgia recruiting front, because I think that this is the 3rd week in a row, at least, where we've had 2 commitments to talk about when it comes to the Georgia 2026 recruiting class. And I'm just going to go in chronological order with them. And so last Saturday, so we're a little bit removed from the news itself, but Georgia adds a cornerback commitment in the class. Caden Harris out of Nashville flips from home city, Nashville, Vanderbilt, to Georgia. And look, I've said it before, I will say it again. Travaris Robinson and Dante Williams are crushing it on the recruiting trail this cycle. There were a lot of negative opinions about how Georgia was doing just DB across the board, whether that be on-field development, whether that be recruiting over the last year. And I tried to caution people, say, hey, this defensive back staff got put into place immediately after getting one of Georgia's best defensive back classes in the 2025 or 2024 cycle. And Travaris Robinson started later in the cycle, as you remember, because Will Muschamp not exited the program, but stepped away from his role a little bit later than the traditional coaching carousel. So it just made it an uphill battle for Georgia defensive back coaches in the 2025 recruiting class. In 2026, we've already seen it with Keelan Jones and Zach Fort and Justice Fitzpatrick and Jordan Smith. Well, you can add another name to that list over the weekend in Caden Harris. This is a guy that Georgia has been in a really good position with all spring long. And, I want to take you back, and I think I told this story a little bit on the show earlier this week. Maybe not, actually, because we were focused more on the draft. But Georgia, Caden Harris, well, let me take it back this way. My first mock class that I put out, I had Caden Harris in there as one of Georgia's 2 cornerbacks in the class. And admittedly, when I created that mock class, that was one of the more confident defensive back spots that I was filling in the mock class. I thought Caden Harris loves Dante Williams. Dante Williams has done an excellent job of recruiting him. He's a top 100 cornerback. It just felt like someone that Georgia was going to end up getting. And then 2 weeks later, he announces that he's going to be committing, and Vanderbilt emerges as the team to beat. And it's like, where did this kind of come from? Well, I don't know. We talked about this at Dogs 24/7 at the time, and I don't know how well people remember, but the Friday before, or the day before, I don't remember what day of the week it was, the day before Caden Harris committed to Vanderbilt, and it was kind of known at the time that Caden Harris was going to commit to Vanderbilt. Georgia defensive backs coach Dante Williams goes in home with Caden Harris and his family. No intention of telling him to hold off from committing to Vanderbilt. No intention of trying to change his mind to commit to Georgia that day, but to let him know, hey, I know you're going to commit to Vanderbilt tomorrow. That's fine. Nothing's going to change with the way that Georgia is going to be recruiting you the rest of the cycle. That really resonated with Caden, but also just his entire family, that Georgia was willing to go out on the road to see a guy that they knew they were not going to be getting 24 hours later, but still make clear that they were going to be a priority in the class. And that's why you saw Caden Harris always was planning to take an official visit to Georgia for that June 6th to 8th official visit weekend. That didn't change. When I talked to Caden Harris immediately coming off of his official visit, I was still a little bit uncertain how the cornerback board was going to materialize. I wasn't 100% certain at the time, and this was just 2 weeks ago, whether I thought Georgia might be trying to take 3 cornerbacks in the class. So I just didn't know exactly where Caden fell in that. Well, the more that we've learned, and this is why we do these shows every single week this time of year, is Georgia does want to take 3 cornerbacks. And Georgia does still really love Caden Harris, and they were pushing him as hard as ever after that official visit. Caden told me after that official visit, sometimes it's 2020 hindsight or 2015 hindsight for some of us now, Jordan, is that he said, I think I still need to weigh my options carefully. And sometimes when you look back at quotes, when I write about them at the time or what he told me at the time, they're not as clear as they are when we know that he's now flipped to Georgia. But when I look back at that interview, I just looked at it on Sunday after he had committed and said, what did he say to me then? Is there something that I could have read into a little bit more to know for certain that this was going to be happening coming out of that official visit? And the more I looked into it, it's like, this is a guy who spoke really highly of Georgia, wasn't willing to sit there and say outright that he was locking things down with Vanderbilt. And that should always be a sign. For anybody that was watching on YouTube, you just saw Jordan playing some clips of his junior highlight tape. And look, this is a lanky, 6'1", athletic, agile cornerback. He is right in the mold of what Georgia looks for at corner. Probably a little bit slighter of frame than Justice Fitzpatrick is. Like when you see Justice Fitzpatrick, you say, is that a guy that could play safety? You look at Caden Harris and you say, that's going to be a guy that plays cornerback at Georgia. Really good pickup for multiple reasons. You're never going to complain about adding a top 100 player. You're never going to complain about adding another really talented body at cornerback. But what really stands out to me is in the 24/7 Sports recruiter rankings, where our database ranks every single position coach based on who they've added in the class, Dante Williams is number 1. And I think that says a lot about the relationships that he built. I think it says a lot about how, when he came on board, did they know that the 2025 class was going to be an uphill battle? Yeah. But I think that he was already getting well ahead on the 2026 relationship building. I think that that's already paid some dividends at safety, where Dante Williams has definitely made a serious assist with Travaris Robinson, but it's already paid dividends with 2 cornerbacks in the class. And as I told our Dogs 24/7 subscribers over the weekend, I do not believe that Georgia is done taking cornerbacks in the 2026 class. Jordan, I know that I was still in recovery mode when this was all going on Friday, when we were kind of getting the intel, and then into Saturday when it was actually happening. Like, what did you make of how all of this unfolded last weekend?
It's one of those. Caden Harris was a guy, as we did our predict a commits and flip a commits the last few weeks. I'm really kicking myself for not picking him, because he was someone that was a very obvious candidate, but I kind of put a little too much stock in. Well, he committed to Vanderbilt, and the quote at the time when he was still planning to come to Georgia was basically, look, I told Coach Dante that I was taking this visit. I'm going to go take the visit. I was really impressed. I finally took the time on Wednesday to watch his film. Like you said, he's not the biggest cornerback, but honestly, between him and Justice Fitzpatrick, and this is just watching their highlights, I kind of thought that Caden was more of the heavy hitter. I mean, he's the guy that's even though he's not as big as Justice, I think he is more willing to deliver a big hit. Some of his highlights were on special teams, which if I'm a Georgia coach, as much as anything, that impresses me. That's a great way when Caden gets to Georgia to make an immediate impact, get him on special teams. That speed really stands out. I wrote about this in a VIP story that'll go out on Thursday. But, watching him and not knowing that competition he's playing, I always kind of want to make that point. But him playing receiver, Ben, I don't know how much you've seen his highlights. He's just blowing by guys. I mean, it's not even close how much faster he is. So I kind of liked what I saw from him as a wide receiver, more so because of what that will translate to. I mean, the speed he's got, his ability to close, and also his hands. I mean, there's some really impressive catches on that highlight reel. If I'm Dante Williams, if I'm T-Rob, if I'm really any of that defensive staff, I think they should feel really good about this. And knowing, like you said, they may not be done at cornerback this cycle.
Yeah, well, and I'll say this too. One, when you flip a guy from Vanderbilt, I think there's certain players, not saying that players have red flags, but when you flip a guy from Vanderbilt, there's certain red flags you just don't have to worry about. Like obviously Vanderbilt has to do its due diligence in a certain way, a little bit differently than a lot of other SEC programs when it just comes to who the guy is. And, when he committed to Vanderbilt in the spring, what I was told was Vanderbilt really made this guy a priority. He was a top 100 player in their area, and they wanted to try and lock him down before he had a chance to really take some of these visits to other places. Another testament, I think, to what Georgia was able to do in terms of building that trust and those relationships in the spring, even when Georgia knew that he was going to be committing to Vanderbilt. So credit to Dante Williams yet again, credit to Travaris Robinson. They're both, they're sort of tag teaming safeties and cornerbacks in this cycle. And I don't think you can reasonably look at Georgia's defensive back class, what they have already, and what I think you can project that they're probably going to get, and not feel good about where Georgia stands for this DB class. And I think it put to rest. I mean, I even on the Junkyard over Dogs 24/7, I made a post about Dante Williams jumping to number 1 in the recruiter rankings. And you even saw a lot of Georgia fans come out, and you don't see this very often. You don't see too many people acknowledging that they were wrong, but you saw a lot of people saying, you know what, I'm here to eat crow. Dante Williams has proven me wrong. And I think we've seen it time and time again. I think, I wasn't covering Georgia at the time, but you saw it with Trey Scott. Sometimes people just need a cycle or maybe even 2 to get their feet under them, establish their relationships, and also just establish a little bit of a proof of concept for future recruits that they're going to try and bring in and say, this is what is capable. Like, again, I think Georgia being able to sell Dalen Everett's development year over year helps a lot, because there was a narrative about Dalen Everett a year ago. And that it's almost the exact opposite narrative. This, we were just talking about earlier this week. It's a guy that could be first team All SEC, preseason All SEC at cornerback. It's a guy that was the player of the game and the defensive player of the game in the SEC championship. And so big addition, and credit to the defensive back staff. And also, I mean, again, I should say, I'm giving a lot of credit to the position coaches. Kirby Smart is always going to be heavily involved when it comes to defensive back recruiting, and that was certainly the case here.
Just wanted to say on the point you were making about, when a position coach is hired and maybe he has a cycle that's not what everybody hoped it would be. I mean, think about how significant that game of catch-up is for you. I mean, think about when schools start recruiting these guys. And if you're coming in, 6 months before that kid is going to commit somewhere, I mean, unless you just knock it out of the park or you landed at the school that they had their heart set on all along, I mean, you are facing an uphill battle. So I think that's a very good point to make with Dante Williams. And yet, you look at, I think about when he was hired from USC, we were kind of looking, and that was coming off a year where USC's secondary wasn't that good. But when you look through his background and what was his strength, it was very clear he was a very good recruiter. So like you said, the patience, I think, has worked out. I think that, he's been a very good addition to this class, and Caden Harris is just another really talented defensive back that he's helped Georgia land.
So Georgia lands a top 100 player over the weekend. And if they just always want to, one-up themselves in recruiting, on Wednesday afternoon, they land a top 50 recruit in offensive lineman Ekene Ogboko. If that last name sounds familiar to you, it should. He is the younger brother of Georgia defensive lineman Nnamdi Ogboko. And if we're being real about it, you probably don't have to look too much further than that to understand how Georgia was able to get this guy. Ekene Ogboko, a couple things I want to call out. Measured in at 6'6", 295 pounds. Actually, I think he was more in like the 305 range when he was on his visit, but you know how official visit weight catches up to guys every now and again. 83-inch wingspan. And I bring up those measurables for a very specific reason. I want to acknowledge that we have him listed as an interior offensive lineman in the 24/7 sports database. I am not disputing that this is a guy that has the ability to play interior offensive line, might even have a clearer path to early playing time on the interior offensive line. But when you say 6'6", holding the frame that he holds, probably has the ability to put on, be playing at 320, and he's got an 83-inch wingspan, that screams offensive tackle at the University of Georgia. From talking with Ekene and talking with his coaches, every single staff that was recruiting him, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Florida, Clemson, and Georgia, were all talking to him about playing offensive tackle. And I think a big reason for that is they know that he is not even scratching the surface of what type of football player he could be. He didn't start playing football until his freshman year of high school. Nobody really knew about him as a recruit until Nnamdi was getting recruited, and he comes up on a visit when Nnamdi took his summer official visit in 2023, and everyone at Georgia's like, wait a minute, there's another one, and he's taller and he's longer and he can play offensive tackle. And so really from that moment forward, Georgia was going to be the team to beat for Ekene Ogboko. Now, were there moments throughout this where there were some question marks? Yeah, there probably was. Quite frankly, when Jackson Cantwell's recruitment was going through it and Georgia was trying to get Jackson Cantwell, just truth be told, the financial obligation required to get a guy like Jackson Cantwell might have made it complicated to also get another top 50 offensive tackle like Ekene Ogboko. It was going to be a difficult decision for Georgia to make. I think that Jackson Cantwell choosing Miami, while that hurt, made things a lot easier for Georgia when it came to the rest of offensive line recruiting. And I think that's a big reason why Georgia was able to really make that full court press and go and get Ekene Ogboko. I think that that's why you're seeing Georgia still in the mix for Malachi Lee when at times that seemed like an unreasonable possibility. And so this is just another big addition for, again, I'll do the same thing I just did with Dante Williams. There's a lot of talk about Stacey Searles. I understand it. People are not happy with Georgia's run game in the 2024 season. I am not here to push back against that. I'm also not here to sit there and point all of the blame at Stacey Searles and say Georgia cannot improve its offensive line so long as he's the offensive line coach. That is where I've got to say I disagree. I think that Ekene Ogboko is just one piece of proof of that. I think that there are more good offensive line news to expect coming on later in this summer. But yeah, I mean, Ekene is just what you look for in an offensive tackle. I talked with his coach, prior to Ekene's commitment. And I said, what separates Ekene from other guys? And the first thing he said to me is, Scott Sinclair is going to love this guy because nobody loves to be in the weight room working on just improving his body more than Ekene Ogboko does. And this is a smart guy, right? Like his coach told me Nnamdi was a 3.9. I think Ekene is a 4.07. They've got two sisters that are in med school and one that's going to get a master's degree in sports medicine. And I thought this was a cool way of him describing it, but he was talking about Nnamdi and Ekene's mom and how she went 4 for 4 raising kids as best as you possibly could. Like she just nailed the parenting job across the board. And I think that you see that show up when it comes to Ekene understanding that he's not where he needs to be. He knows that, yeah, he's a top 40 recruit. Yeah, Florida and Clemson and Ohio State and Notre Dame, they all wanted him. But he also knows that if he wants to be a day one offensive tackle, which I think a lot of people think he has the upside to be able to become, I think he knows that he's going to have to get to work. And I think that he's the type of guy that Scott Sinclair is going to be able to dig his teeth into and turn into one of these, Broderick Jones, Amarius Mims types. He might not, be quite the freakish size of Amarius Mims, but he is definitely one of those types of guys. When you see him, you say, holy moly, that looks like an NFL offensive tackle type. So huge addition for Georgia on the offensive line. I think it creates a clearer picture of what this Georgia offensive line class is going to be. And really, once he took that official visit to Georgia, Georgia wasn't going to let him leave without knowing that he was going to be in the class. And that's why you saw he never took another official visit to Ohio State. He never took another official visit to Notre Dame. And that was kind of that.
Yeah, really impressed watching his film. I mean, he's just a mauler. I mean, like there's a few plays. There's one play in particular in his highlight reel. He takes a guy to the sideline. I was kind of worried for the intern or the student manager who was videoing on the sideline. He almost got ran over because Ekene took him all the way to his defender all the way to the sideline. But I really like what he brings to the table. And man, I think if Georgia staff wasn't grateful for these families that they get to know over the years, I mean, look at just this year alone. I mean, and getting Carter Lucky and just what they've done, and even going back to what we talked about last episode, the Branch brothers, adding them too. So it's paid off, and there's a chance too with PJ Dean, who we're still waiting to see. Who's Jared Wilson, the center from last year. So I really like this addition. I'm glad you pointed out the offensive tackle piece of this. I mean, it's one where you can definitely see the fit there, and that is such a need for Georgia in this cycle. And I think he's totally capable. And the example I wanted to give, because that was a question along the way, was like, well, you guys have him listed as an interior offensive lineman. If you remember, Ben, Ernest Green was listed as an interior offensive lineman when he's being recruited. He gets to Georgia, and pretty much immediately they're like, this guy's a tackle. And he winds up playing left tackle as a redshirt freshman and now getting ready to play right. So if I'm a Georgia fan, I wouldn't worry so much about where he's listed at on the different recruiting sites. He's got the build and that wingspan and the ability to play offensive tackle. And, he might get run at guard early on as a means to get him on the field. But he checks a lot of boxes as a future offensive tackle for Georgia.
Yeah, and I think, the guy that Georgia wants to play offensive tackle that can play guard is a very common thing. Like Juan Gaston, when I was talking with Stacey Searles about that down at the Sugar Bowl Media Day, he was saying, look, you see the measurables, you think offensive tackle. He's like, you see 6'8", you say got to be an offensive tackle. But they also think he has the skill set to play on the interior offensive line. And, Georgia loves offensive line versatility. That is very important to them. We've talked about that when it comes to interior offensive linemen, but really it's just offensive line in general. And I think Ekene Ogboko, probably as much as any recruit that Georgia was recruiting this cycle, fits the mold of someone, I wouldn't say center, but he could play any of the other 4 offensive line positions. And that's really, really important to what Georgia is trying to do. The offensive line is starting to materialize. I don't think it's done yet, but it is starting to really come together. And I will say, no matter what the rankings say, Georgia feels awesome about Ekene Ogboko, Zyke Helton, Zach Lewis, and Graham Houston. So let's just make that crystally clear. All right, let's take a look at last weekend's official visits. There hasn't been any news to come out of last weekend's official visits yet, but I think that there likely is to be. And so I'll start with the commit. Well, I'll say this. There were 3 commits on campus that you just don't have to worry about. Quarterback Jared Curtis, he was in full recruiting other guys mode when he was on campus last weekend. He is as sound as it gets. And I'm hopeful and I'm expecting to get to see Jared Curtis throwing in a setting at the end of the month. I want to cross my fingers there just because I haven't gotten to see a whole lot of it just through certain injuries that he's had. And he was sick at a time that I was up in Nashville to go see him. So I'm expecting to be able to see him at the end of the month doing some throwing stuff. But again, counting my blessings there. Lincoln Keys, a tight end that nobody is talking enough about in terms of how much Georgia loves this guy. I've said it on here before. He's obviously been a guest on our show in the past. Super talented guy that Georgia really, really likes at tight end. I think it made it a little bit easier for Georgia to accept the Mark Bowman loss, knowing that they had Lincoln Keys already in the class and that they still had Caden Prothro out there. They're still keeping things warm with Braden Fogel. So let's see how the rest of that plays out. And then Zach Fort is probably the most vocal public Georgia recruiter right now in the class. You saw that this past weekend with a couple of other players, specifically his high school teammate, Brett Collegier, who we'll get to in a minute. But there was one commit that was on campus where I think there's still some uncertainty. And I said last week when we were talking about Vance Spafford, I would like to think we'd get more clarity coming out of the weekend. I don't necessarily know that I have more clarity at this exact point in time. It went well. He spent a lot of time with Jared Curtis, spent a lot of time with Lincoln Keys. I think that there's a belief that Georgia might hold on to him, but I think that there's still an ongoing conversation about what Vance is going to do and what Georgia's plan might be when it comes to the slot receiver position. One thing I'm watching is whether he takes that official visit to Miami this upcoming weekend. If he does, I'm not saying that it's over, but I think that it gets a little bit murkier for Georgia's chances of holding on to him. And I also want to say, I want to figure out how to put this delicately to not sound ridiculous as I'm saying it. Vance Spafford is a 5'9" slot receiver that runs a 4.35. He is crazy athletic, crazy fast, but you also have to accept what that player's role is in any type of offense, right? Like you're never going to go be the dominant X wide receiver as a 5'9" receiver. And so I think that what Georgia has to do is say, all right, if we're going to go all the way out to California to get this type of guy, is there absolutely nobody else in the state of Georgia that fits a similar type of mold that we couldn't get for a more favorable price probably than going all the way across the country and trying to bring someone to Georgia? That's not – I want to be very clear in saying that is not me saying that Vance Spafford is not a good player. That is not me saying that he's not a take. That is not me saying that Georgia doesn't really want him. It's just me saying that in a rev share era with the specific role that he would serve in an offense, it's a little bit more complicated. And so that's why I've brought up Terrius Favors in the past, who private worked out last weekend, took an official visit last weekend, who – to my understanding, is on campus as we're recording this for a 7-on-7 with his high school football team. It's a lot of times for a guy like that to be on campus in a week if Georgia and him are not taking it that seriously. That said, it's a delicate situation. If Vance Spafford really wants to stick in the class and Georgia finds a way to figure it out, based on what I'm hearing behind the scenes, I don't know that Georgia is going to take another type of receiver like that. And I think that Georgia feels pretty good about some other receivers, one in particular, that it's still recruiting that has a commitment date coming up at the end of June. So I bring up all that to say we're still in wait and see mode on Vance Spafford. But if you see him on a Miami official visit this weekend, I might feel better about either Miami or Washington signing him when it's all said and done. But there is still a very much a world where Georgia decides Vance Spafford's the best option and Vance Spafford decides, yeah, Georgia's the best opportunity for me. I know that's a lot of words to basically say, I don't really know, Jordan. but that's just kind of how I feel about the Vance Spafford situation. I know last week you said you don't see him in the class. You put Terrius Favors in your predict to commit team. How you feeling a week later?
I'm feeling okay. I think, like you said, you'll get kind of a better understanding depending on what Vance winds up doing if he takes that Miami visit. I did want to ask for the people listening, all right, let's say whether it's this weekend or whether it's 2 months from now, Vance Spafford decides he's decommitting and he either decommits or he flips. Is Terrius Favors the only name to know at this point? Who would you look at if it is, we find out eventually Vance Spafford does not stick in this class?
I think that Terrius Favors is ideal scenario for Georgia. I also think that it's complicated because you have to be so delicate in terms of how you're managing a recruitment like this. Like, I'll just straight up say it. And Terrius said it to me fully on the record when we talked on Sunday. Georgia's got 4 receivers committed right now, which is a little bit of news because Georgia has 3 receivers committed right now to the public world, but there is stuff that has happened behind the scenes. And so he doesn't feel as though he has a spot at Georgia right now. Georgia's been open with him about that. Is he receptive to Georgia circling back in a few months? Is he receptive to Georgia circling back in a week and a half? It's an answer that Georgia probably doesn't even have yet. It's an answer that Terrius Favors might not really even have yet, even though he's saying right now, like, I'm locked into Boise. He's still taking some visits to places like Tulane and Appalachian State. And I know that some Georgia fans will hear Boise and Tulane and Appalachian State and say, what's the big deal? Look, he's a 5'9" slot receiver from Atlanta that not a ton of people really knew about until Georgia started getting heavily involved in his recruitment. We'll just have to see. I mean, Terrius Favors is definitely a name to know. A name from South Georgia that I love as a slot is Bubba Frazier, currently committed to Notre Dame. And I think Notre Dame is one of the more difficult programs in the country to flip players from, as we'll talk about a little bit later in the show when we get to around the country. Like, it doesn't matter how well established your relationships are. Notre Dame is a special place. This is going to offend some people. Notre Dame is a special place. And guys commit to Notre Dame sometimes for different reasons than they commit to other programs. And there is a historic, feel to Notre Dame that I think makes guys who, once they commit to Notre Dame, committed to going to Notre Dame. And so we'll see. I also think that that's a position, sort of like the second offensive tackle position. Like, if Georgia doesn't get Malachi Lee, if it's too late to get a guy like Fletcher Turk, who took an official visit a couple of weeks ago. We just saw Georgia eval a bunch of offensive linemen throughout their senior years and go find Dennis Uzochukwu to bring in the class. I think that's something that's very possible when it comes to the slot receiver position. I also think that there is a world where, Georgia's got Ryan Mosley. They've got Brady Marchese. They've got unnamed, silently committed wide receiver that Terrius Favors alerted the world is one of the 4 wide receivers committed to Georgia that all have a versatility factor to them. I could see Georgia going with a big body receiver or a different type of wide receiver, maybe someone that we'll talk about here in a second as well, that they just go with a little bit of a different look. And hey, maybe they like where they're at with Caden Prothro. They aren't sure exactly how things are going to play out with Braden Fogel. Maybe they just say, all right, we'll take 3 receivers and 3 tight ends. Like, I think there's a couple of different contingency plans that Georgia can go with if it plays out in a way where Vance Spafford flips, Terrius Favors feels a little bit slighted and doesn't want, or just feels like it's a better fit for him somewhere else, and Bubba Frazier is not able to be flipped. Georgia has some options in terms of how they can address that. And I think that it still remains to be seen how that's going to be playing out. And quite frankly, as we're recording this, and I'll just, for full transparency, on Wednesday afternoon with Terrius Favors on, for all I know, Terrius Favors was the best player at Georgia's 7-on-7 today. I wish more than anything that they allowed media over at that thing, because I just love watching ball, and I wish that I could do that in Athens, Georgia. Not fortunate enough to be able to do that. But for all I know, he was the best player at the camp today. And if that happens, maybe Georgia goes the extra mile to be able to just get it done with Terrius Favors right now. Who knows? We'll see. But the slot receiver situation and how it plays out with the rest of the pass catchers, I do think there is a little bit of a domino effect there in terms of how things play out with Vance Spafford. I'm going to talk about some other guys coming out of the weekend that I feel like Georgia is in a really good spot with. And then a couple others where we'll see. But I think that Georgia's in a good spot, but we're still in sort of wait and see mode. So 2 guys that I think Georgia did themselves some major favors with last weekend. Safety from Buford High School, Tyreek Green. Could probably play star, probably play safety. Thumper of a defensive back, and someone that I've witnessed it firsthand just being out at a Kell practice when he was still at Kell after his sophomore season. I witnessed him and Travaris Robinson and just sort of their interactions and relationships. That is a deep-rooted relationship. I think Travaris Robinson has done an excellent job there. I'm not even 100% certain that Tyreek Green's going to end up taking his final official visit this upcoming weekend. That's something that we will keep an eye on. He has a July 12th commitment date, I believe, and I'm leaning Georgia. Let's put it that way. I've been leaning Georgia for a while. That's why he was on my predict to commit team. That's why I've put in a crystal ball pick over at 24/7 Sports. But sometimes these official visits change the way that I feel on these things. This is one where I think it probably reinforces how I feel about it. Another name, defensive lineman, listed as an edge at 24/7 Sports. I think he's someone that could be kind of a hybrid, but Corey Howard is a defensive lineman from Valdosta, picked up an offer through the spring evaluation period, took an official visit this past weekend. He really, really liked what Georgia was talking to him about over the weekend. I believe he's going to be back on campus later this week to camp and work out with Georgia. I think that should probably tell you a lot about the mutual interest. He was just on an OV. He's still willing to come back up and work out with Georgia. I think that if things go well this week, I think that there is a great chance that you end up seeing him as a future Bulldogs commit. He's someone that I could see playing a little bit of 5 technique, might be able to shade inside to 3 technique depending on how his body develops, might even be able to shade outside a little bit to 9. I think, versatility at that defensive line position will be important, especially when Georgia's only planning to take one true outside linebacker, Jack linebacker in Chidera Uzo-Duribe's room this cycle. I think that will make things a little bit easier. What do you think, Jordan? Tyreek Green, Corey Howard, Dogs?
I think both of them.
Yeah.
I think I'll shout out the story you wrote on Corey Howard coming off of that visit. I mean, it seemed like very positive there. And like you said, I mean, we've talked about, we think they'll probably only take one outside linebacker. And, I think I kind of got caught up in, this guy's listed as an edge. But thinking about him on this defensive line, a group that I think, would we say at this point, defensive line is the one we have the least amount of clarity on with this recruiting cycle? I really like that. And then Tyreek Green, too. I mean, you've been on that one for a while. And, if you've been covering Georgia for a while, not to put the cart before the horse on a Buford kid, but they've done a pretty good job of recruiting Buford guys here lately. And I do like what we've heard to this point on Tyreek Green.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Couple other guys that on the offensive line, one was an official visit, Brett Collegier, and one was the big unofficial visit from Malachi Lee, who I knew Malachi was coming. I didn't realize he was bringing his whole family back with him. I'll start with Brett. IMG Academy, ties to Zach Fort. Those two are very close friends. Very good friends with Lincoln Keys and Jared Curtis. I'm told that the 3 of those guys spent a lot of time with one another on the official visit weekend. I said last week, Jordan, that you've got Desmond Green on your predict to commit team. I've got Brett Collegier on my predict to commit team. I feel like one of us was going to be right and one of us was going to be wrong. I'm still not at the point of making a decision one way or the other, but I will give credit again to some On3 folks that put in some predictions. There have been some Desmond Green to Florida predictions that have come in. I'm not saying that means that Georgia is getting Brett Collegier, but I'm saying Georgia felt really good about where it stood with Desmond Green, and it was kind of like, just wait it out, take your visits, let's see what happens. Maybe that means that there's some good news coming with Brett Collegier. We will see. I'm still waiting to gather a little bit more information there, but to my conversation about, Stacy Searles, they've got 3 interior offensive linemen from the state that they really like those in-state evals on. They went out of state and got an offensive tackle that has all the NFL measurables that they look for. They would like to go out of state to go get a guy that they think is one of the best offensive guards in the country in Brett Koleje. And then they're still hanging around somehow beyond my wildest expectations with Hawaii offensive tackle Malachi Lee, who took his official visit April 12th for the G-Day spring game. He then came back this summer for an unofficial visit. He still has an official visit coming up next weekend or this upcoming weekend to Michigan. Texas is hanging around. Michigan's hanging around. Alabama has not been mentioned nearly enough in this one, considering Tua Tagovailoa's dad was a participant on Malachi Lee's official visit and has a close relationship with the family. And I think that that's something that absolutely matters when it comes to that recruitment. So all four teams are still heavily involved. I definitely think that it was a successful weekend for Georgia on the Malachi Lee front. We'll know a little bit more coming out of his official visit to Michigan, but he has a June 27th commitment date scheduled. And I've been telling people all spring, do not get your hopes up for Malachi Lee. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you start getting your hopes up for Malachi Lee, but I will say maybe don't listen to me as much as you had when I was saying just ignore that recruitment, because I just don't see it happening. I thought it was a pretty far-fetched expectation. I don't know. I think it's interesting, Jordan. I think it's really interesting.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is you're hanging around in this recruitment. And I know that, if they miss out on him, that's no consolation. And no Georgia fans will be like, well, at least we got him on campus a couple times. But I mean, with a guy of that caliber and with the importance that the offensive tackle position has become, especially after you don't get Jackson Cantwell, I do think they deserve credit to hanging around in this recruitment. Again, that doesn't mean anything if you don't get him, and that's no consolation. But, you just kind of want to be in the mix. And, I mean, that's a heck of a group of schools, talking about Michigan and Alabama and Texas, and that's not going to be easy. But Georgia's at least hanging around and still in that conversation. They're at least going to make it difficult on these other schools when it comes time for Malachi Lee to make a decision.
100%. Previewing this upcoming official visit weekend, we're going to, the last 3 weekends have been loaded in numbers. I think it was close to 20 the first 2 weekends. I think it was about 15 last weekend. I've been saying all month, this last official visit weekend is going to be smaller in numbers, but your hit rate might be higher. And the reason for that is Georgia is getting a clearer picture of what their recruiting board looks like. Other schools are getting a clearer picture of what their recruiting board is going to look like. Certain guys that were scheduled to be at Georgia for the June 20th official visit weekend have committed to other places, and they're not taking visits anywhere else. And so that official visit list has shrunk down significantly. And I'll say this, it's shrunk down even since we've been on this in terms of a text message that I just had come through. So I'm going to talk about 3 guys that are going to be on campus this weekend. And there might be more players that come on campus. There are people that are working out in the 26 class that have gotten offers this week. They might schedule official visits if things go well with them in Georgia. But my focus is going to be on 3. So 1, running back Jay Lamar. This is a weekend everybody's been waiting on. This is a weekend Jay's been waiting on. This is a weekend that Josh Crawford's been waiting on. This is a weekend that Georgia fans have been waiting on, because it hasn't been obvious who Georgia's going to take at running back in this cycle. But Jay Lamar is the name that I've always felt it would be hard-pressed to see him sign anywhere other than Georgia. Now, he's coming off a Miami visit that made it interesting. Things got interesting with Clemson at points during the spring. Well, I think Georgia is still in the driver's seat. No matter what has happened, I think Georgia remains in the driver's seat for Jay Lamar. This is a guy from Colquitt County High School that just kind of fits what Georgia's looking for from in-state running backs. He's always loved Georgia. He's known Josh Crawford since before he was really a football recruit in his own right, just through his older brother's recruitment. I was actually down at a Colquitt County morning practice earlier this year, and Josh Crawford was there, and similar to what I was talking about with Tyreek Green and Travaris Robinson. Sometimes you can just sense it, that there is a bond between player and coach that's a little bit different than you've seen with others. I certainly think that's the case with Jay Lamar and Georgia. I also will say I don't think that this is a recruitment that Georgia can afford to lose at this point, because I don't love where Georgia is with Savion Hyder. I don't really like much at all where Georgia is with Derek Cooper right now. I think Georgia wants to take 2 running backs. Well, those are the only 3 names that Georgia has had on official visits this summer. So I think Georgia's got to lock in Jay Lamar this weekend. If they don't, I'll be honest with you, I don't know 100% what the pivot plan would be. I know there is a chance, and I'm going to say chance because he hasn't confirmed it to me yet, but I've heard that Amari Latimer is a big body wide receiver from Sandy Creek High School in Atlanta. I've mentioned him at times on the show before, and especially on our board over at Dogs 24/7, because he's got some of the best running back film in the state of Georgia. Unbelievable hands out of the backfield, massive running back. Doesn't necessarily have the testing numbers that match up with some of what Georgia typically looks for at running back. And I think that's probably what's held him back a little bit getting recruited by Georgia. But I think that Georgia saw him go take an official visit up to Wisconsin earlier this month. Buzz started to generate around Amari Latimer and Wisconsin. And Georgia said, maybe wait a second. We're not ready. We really hope that you're not going to do that yet, because we still want to have a chance. So not 100% sure about Amari Latimer yet, but I think Georgia's got to find a way to lock down Jay Lamar. He leaves that official visit June 22nd. He commits June 25th. Again, I sort of think of it like the Ekene Ogboko situation, where nobody wanted to outright say they think Georgia's going to be the favorite to get him, but then when he leaves the official visit, I think it's going to be pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, watching what happens with Jay Lamar to me is so big right now, and we've had people on the board. I do those Friday Q&As, and people are asking me, all right, who are the running backs they get in this class? And my prediction was, the last Q&A I did was Jay Lamar, and I said, in a running back we're not talking about right now. And the response was, well, tell us who that is. And I'm saying, we don't know. I think that to get that second running back, it's going to be a guy that we're not talking about, which makes me really intrigued by Lattimore, who you just brought up. I'm with you. I don't really like how things look at this point with Savion Hyder. Derek Cooper, I think he was my very first predicted commit. And, I think if I had to make a prediction right now, Miami would be who I'm watching there. But I mean, I think this is a very important recruiting cycle for Josh Crawford after the way that his first cycle at Georgia played out. They don't get Usmani Chroma. If you want to try to get your top running backs, and they're swinging for the fences with some of those guys. But I think at the very least, they really, really need Jay Lamar. And then if they have to get creative with who they get for that second back, I think there's enough talented options out there. They can do that. And when the class is done, they can feel good about the 2 running backs they wind up getting.
The Dogs the doom and gloom folks over at Dogs 24/7 will accuse me of copium for this one, but having seen both of them in person, if Georgia gets Jay Lamar and they do end up circling around and getting Amari Latimer, that is an awesome running back class. Amari Latimer, I've said it on our board even before I knew that Georgia was considering circling back on him, that Amari Latimer is one of my favorite running backs in the state of Georgia this cycle. I understand the reasons why 230-pound running back that doesn't have great testing numbers, why Georgia might not be going all in on that guy, but the dude just scores touchdowns. Like, that's what he does. He's just an unbelievable player. So again, too early to say on Amari Latimer, but if it ends up being Lamar and Latimer, nothing to worry about at Georgia's running back position.
As the great philosopher Garth Brooks once said, some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. So that could wind up working.
What I was going to say, Jordan. That's exactly what I was going to say. All right, a couple other players there. I said I was going to only bring up 3, and then I brought up Amari Latimer, so you're getting 4. Wide receiver, Kayvon Conciaro, Houston County, big body wide receiver. Now, what's interesting here is, like, if we're talking traditional wide receiver in the Georgia's recruiting class, Ryan Mosley is probably who you look at, and he's more in the big body mold than some. So Georgia hasn't necessarily felt like it needs to go get a big body wide receiver in the class. But I think that if they just, I talked earlier, if Vance Spafford flips and Terrius Favors isn't receptive and Bubba Frazier isn't receptive, and there's not a clear in-state slot option that they feel great about, maybe they just change their plan and they go try and get someone entirely different altogether. And maybe that's Kayvon Conciaro. He's a, 6'4", 6'5" wide receiver. He's even bigger in body type than Ryan Mosley is. And so it's one that it's interesting to me because I know the dude loves Georgia. He obviously already has a high school teammate, Jordan Smith, committed in Georgia's 2026 recruiting class. He's the only wide receiver. Georgia had originally had Prince Gene was going to be on an official visit this weekend. He committed to Kentucky. Trying to think some other wide receivers. Joel Wyatt is a big body wide receiver from Tennessee. He was going to be on an official visit this weekend. That's not happening anymore. A guy in the past, Keyshawn Schneider Tabito, he was going to be on an official visit to Georgia. That's not going to be happening anymore. But Kayvon Conciaro, Georgia's still bringing in on an official visit. So that should tell you a little bit about how Kayvon feels about waiting to see what Georgia has to say, and that Georgia still wants to bring a guy like that on campus, despite the fact the wide receiver class is filling up a little bit. So that's one that I am very intrigued to see how it plays out coming out of the weekend. And I think it 100% plays in to the Vance Spafford, Terrius Favors, 4th wide receiver, 5 wide receivers. Like, what does that picture look like? We don't know quite yet. But Kayvon Conciaro is a name that I have had in my mock class in the past. It's typically been when I've had 5 receivers in the class. And I feel like right now Georgia's more likely to take 4 than 5. But if Vance flips and those other slots aren't receptive, that 4th could very well be Kayvon Conciaro.
Fascinated to see what happens with the receiver, because there's been a few times with different positions these last few cycles where they load up at a position and then the following year I'm like, well, they're not going to get that. They're not going to take that many guys after they signed, like when they've gotten a bunch of inside linebackers, and they go and do it again. So maybe for me, I'm putting too much stock in, well, they signed 5 receivers last cycle. They can't possibly do that again. I mean, if the cards fall the right way and it plays out, maybe they do. But I think 4 for me, 4 seems like the safe bet. And then maybe if things fall in a certain direction, they do wind up with 5.
Now, Jordan, stop me if you've heard this before. I'm expecting Valden Sona, defensive lineman from Sweden, currently at a boarding school in Virginia. I'm expecting him on an official visit to Georgia this weekend. I was expecting him on an official visit at the beginning of the month. That turned out to be a camp visit. When we did this show last week, I was expecting him to be on the official visit last weekend. He ended up earning a camp offer from Ohio State, taking an official visit to Nebraska with the full intention of him being on an official visit to Georgia this final weekend. Someone brought it to my attention on our board earlier today that there were some Texas people that were saying he might be taking an official visit there. I have checked in on it. I am expecting him at Georgia. The people that I trust are expecting him at Georgia. In fact, when I brought it up to someone, they said that he better the hell not be going to Texas. And that was like a news flash to them. We'll see. Because I've been burned on Valden Sona enough. I even cheated last week, Jordan, because we did predict a commit and we were only doing it with guys for the upcoming official visit weekend. And he didn't end up coming on that official visit weekend. Yet I still put him on my predict to commit team. So you can rule. I'll let you be the Deloitte clearinghouse on that one and determine whether I, stepped out of line on that. But a big body defensive lineman that Georgia really, really wants. I think it's funny. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about Corey Howard, still some uncertainty on the defensive line. We say that, but they already have Carter Lucky in the class. They already have Seven Cloud in the class, who they firmly believe is the best defensive lineman that they're going to be taking. They're camping Corey Howard later this week. I think that they feel like they are in good enough position to maybe land one of James Johnson, Kendall Guerville, obviously Valden Sona. So it's not a totally clear picture on the defensive line, but for this was a recruiting class where I was told not the deepest class on the defensive line, especially in the state of Georgia. I don't think that they were expecting to just dominate, hit home runs when it comes to defensive line recruiting in this class. If you're looking at Cloud, Lucky, Corey Howard, Valden Sona, and one of James Johnson or Kendall Guerville or some variation of that, I think Georgia's going to be feeling pretty good about the defensive line cycle. I'm going to put you on the spot, Jordan. Am I going to have to correct myself on Valden Sona's official visit for a 3rd time this month? What do you think?
I think he's coming to Athens for this visit. He made Ben Wolk sweat a little bit, but as frustrating as I'm sure that is for the folks following this recruitment, I think you just look at those schools pushing for him and you understand how talented he is. I mean, the Ohio States and Nebraska. I think that, Georgia, getting JJ Hanna in the last cycle, I think that they see real potential with going international with some of these guys and, another defensive lineman at that. So I can see it being a little frustrating to follow right now, but I'm going to say he's in Athens this weekend, and hate to say it, but I think that was a good pick by you when it comes to where he ultimately winds up.
I want to offer a little bit of grace when it comes to that one too, because I know some people might read like he was going to go to Florida and he had to cancel the Florida visit, and he was going to go to Georgia and he canceled the Georgia visit. And then he ends up at Ohio State camp and goes to Nebraska, and now Georgia and Texas, they both kind of think that he's coming on official visits this weekend. This is a guy who was relatively unknown about 8 months ago. He is from Sweden. He doesn't have exposure to a lot of these on-campus experiences the way that some of these guys do over the course of their recruitments. So I have no issue with it being complicated. It's a time crunch. There's only so many dates for him to be able to do certain things, and he's a guy that hasn't had the chance to be able to do as much or give a real honest look to all these various options. I think that's played into why some of the visits and decisions have been a little bit convoluted throughout the last month or so. So I do just want to, I know that some people that hear this, they say, more trouble than it's worth or whatever. Don't think of it that way. Like, come on. Like, when guys are from Europe and they're going through this process for the first time and they haven't gotten to experience a lot of these things, it's very easy to understand how it might just get handled a little bit differently. And that, he's been back and forth between the United States and Sweden at times. It's not always easy to get the schedule right. So I'll still be monitoring to make sure that he comes on the official visit this weekend, but I do think that he will be there.
As far as your pick last week, I mean, I hate to give it to you, but like, I kind of see that like, an NFL team in the third round saying, we don't really like anything on the board. We're just going to trade out and move back to the fourth, pick up another fifth. I mean, it's kind of ingenious. I hate saying that, but I don't know that any punishment is necessary. I just think that was a savvy move.
It's too kind of you. I probably wouldn't have given myself that much fairness, but hey, you said it. You're the Deloitte clearinghouse and your ruling is final. So we have no choice but to accept it.
That's what the D stands for in Jordan D. Hill. It's Deloitte.
Yeah, Jordan Deloitte Hill. All right. So good stuff on the news front. What's happened already? What's coming up? We've got a pretty solid interview with wide receiver Gavin Honore, Mater Dei High School, the only commit in the 2027 recruiting class. Another 5'10" slot receiver type. He talks a little bit just about what stood out to him on his visit to Georgia, what he's bringing to Georgia's offensive recruiting class. So we will jump into that interview. Before we do, don't forget, please subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We've got a great promotion going right now. 50% off through the end of June, Jordan. But do it now, just in case my date's wrong on that. Make sure that you don't miss out. This will get you really all the way through next official visit season. So pretty much everything that you would want for the calendar year, you will get. So subscribe. Obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever it is, like, thumbs up, subscribe, download, please. We greatly appreciate you. It helps us out immensely. And if you don't want to help me out, help Jordan out. He deserves it. So please subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We will jump into that interview with Gavin Honore. And when we come back, we will have our fun segments, Predict a Commit, Around the Country, and Arrow Pointing Up. welcome into the show a very, very, very special guest. It is 5'10", 175-pound wide receiver from Mater Dei High School in California. As a sophomore, 23 catches, 353 yards, 6 touchdowns. Dynamic playmaker as a return man as well. Sub 11 in the 100, so this dude can really scoot. He's the first member of Georgia's 2027 recruiting class. It is Gavin Honore. Thanks for joining the show. Gavin, how'd I do with that pronunciation?
They're great. Better than others, for sure.
Okay, we'll continue to work on it and make sure we get it right. But I wanted to start with, for starters, congratulations on the decision.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to get into it a little bit more. So I know you come on that visit last weekend. It was clearly a calculated trip. Like, you're in town for multiple days, you camp with the staff, you get back home. I think you announced it to the world about the second that you landed back in California.
Yeah.
So what was it about Georgia that made you so ready to join the class?
It was honestly just it was really the culture. The moment I stepped foot on campus, I already knew this is just so much different from all the other colleges. And coming from a program like Mater Dei, the culture really has a lot to do with the program and how the program runs. And so with me, I've always told myself, whatever college I go to, whatever college I decide to make the decision on, culture has to be good, the way the program is ran. And the moment I step foot on campus, you could just see it just right off the bat.
So, I mean, knowing that you came for multiple days, that you wanted to commit like right after you got home, did you know coming into the trip this is probably the way that it was going?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I told my parents, I was like, if Georgia's right when we go out there, I'm most likely gonna commit, because also, and Georgia's also been a dream school of mine since I was a little kid. Growing up watching college football, I watched college football more than NFL. So just growing up in Georgia, always being a powerhouse, I've always grown up watching Georgia. And, big SEC team. It just felt right. Just being a dream school of mine. So going out there, I kind of had the idea. Everything just had to fall into place, though, and it did. So.
That probably surprises some people, like a guy that lives out in California, sees a place like Georgia as a dream school. Like, you mentioned it there, like you grew up on college football. You saw Georgia being one of the top programs. But before you started getting recruited by Georgia, like, what did you know about Georgia that made you feel that way?
Honestly, just that they were a real powerhouse. And so before I started getting recruited, I've always told my parents I want to play in the SEC. Because, that's I feel like the SEC is the heart, of college football, the toughest league there is. So growing up, I'm like, if I want to go play college football, I want to go play in the SEC. And then once I started following the SEC more and more, it's always been Georgia, Alabama, but Georgia's been up there as the top program the past, I don't know how long they've always been up there. So just growing college football and just Georgia being one of those top schools, I always had my eyes on.
So I know you've probably gotten this question from some other people as well, but what made you comfortable enough to commit as early as you did? Like we said, you're the first guy in the 2027 class. Like, what made you want to do it now, this early in your process?
With me, so I actually had another conversation with my parents about this, the family. Going into high school, I know me and my size, I'm not going to be, it's 6 foot and above, just a big body type of receiver. And so, slots recently have been, blowing up in the game. So, but I know a lot of rankings and stuff, they get based on, draft projection and size and stuff like that. But for me, it was honestly what I want to do is I like schools that take chances on me. And Georgia was really one of the first big schools to offer me. And so I told my parents, like, if whichever big school, whichever dream school that I get an offer from takes a chance on me, that's what I'm going to roll with. Because, like I said, I've been, underrated my whole life just based off my size. And, just, which, takes that chance. That's what I want to roll.
Awesome. So you're in town for several days. How many days were you in town?
I was there from Saturday. Yeah, I left Saturday and then left Monday morning.
Okay, so what
Monday
all
at
did you
like
get to
3.
do? What all did you get to do while you were in Athens?
So right when I Sunday just went in and got food, then went straight to the camp. Camped, did the camp, and then right after that had the coaches meeting, the coaches dinner in the stadium too, and then the next morning I had the meeting with Coach Kirby Smart. So
At what point in all of that did you let Coach Coley or Coach Smart know, like, all right, this is where I want to be?
it was so during the camp actually because it was so hectic going into it because there's just so much kids, everyone's trying to get registered. So I'm trying to figure my stuff out. I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna just worry about the camp first, and then ended up doing great in the camp. Talking to Coach Coley, the whole coaching staff during the camp, getting seeing how like their coaching style is, seeing how they coach, and just based off that, really during the camp, I'm like, this it's good coaches. It's a great coaching staff. Just being able to experience that while I'm getting coached, it was really good. So basically, after that, when it had the coaches meeting, the whole coaching staff was really welcoming with my family. That's one big thing that I really am big on in recruiting is, if I gotta feel like a family environment. So once my parents were in love with it, my little sister, she was in love with it. So I was like, it marked all the boxes. So right after the coaches dinner, I sat down with Coach Coley, let him know that I wanted to be the first commit 2027.
What was the reaction from him?
Very excited. Good, yeah. I was like, shoot, you got any commits, coach? And he's like, shoot, I mean, I don't. I was like, I want to be the first commit, coach. So, but yeah, he was very excited. It was a very cool moment.
We hear about these camps and private workouts and things like that, and that's really important to Georgia, as I'm sure you know. Like, they like to actually see you work in person. What goes on at one of these camps, or like what is going through your mind, or what are you trying to prove when you're out at one of those Georgia elite camps?
When I'm at the camp, it's just one thing I just have in my head is just ball out, show the coaches what I'm really about. Coming from California, this is my first time in Georgia. This is my first time working out. I've only worked out in front of Coach Harley because he's been at Mater Dei the past couple, So I've only worked out in front of him, and this is my first time of them, all the coaches actually seeing me in person. So every time I get a chance to work out in front of a coach for the first time, just got to, show them what I'm about. So, just had to really put my head down and keep working throughout the camp. It was a tough camp, but it was really good work, and that's what I really liked about it. So it was really good work.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Coach Hartley going out there. I know he's been going out to see Mark a lot. Georgia needed some good news from Mater Dei.
Yeah.
So last episode I had on Ryan Mosley, 2026 wide receiver commit, and we were talking about Coach Coley's tagline. He loves to say change the game. Whenever receivers commit, he always says change the game. I'm sure that he said it to you while you were out on your visit. Like, when you hear him say change the game, how do you interpret that?
Just be a game changer. You got to be different once you're on that field. Regular old guy on the field. If you really want to prove something, actually win, you got to change the game. Be a game changer. And that's really something he really harps on, and that's something I always had in my head. Once you step on that field, you got to be a game changer. You got to really pop out to everybody.
No. So for the people at home, we can watch your film, we can talk to coaches or get feedback on things or whatever, but I want to hear your self-assessment. Like, what type of game are you bringing to Georgia's receiver room?
Definitely, like you said, a game changer. Something I really have been working on the past, 2 years at Mater Dei is that not only I can play in the side, but I can also play anywhere, like on the outside, anywhere on the field, anywhere a coach needs me to play, I could go out there. So on some of my film, I'm on the outside. That's really just something I've been working on, so I could really be a versatile receiver and just prove I could really play anywhere on the field, wherever your coach needs me to play. So anything to help the team out and, just be, like Coach Coley says, a game changer.
Yeah, no doubt. I wanted to give a shout out to one of your high school teammates as well. So after you committed, Sean Scott, linebacker that's committed to USC, he hit me up. I met him out at the All-American Bowl in San Antonio, or All-American Combine in San Antonio in January. He hit me up and was like, Georgia just got a dude. And I'll admit, I didn't know a ton about your game. It's 2027s are relatively new, but I know if Sean Scott's giving you the seal of approval,
it's my guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, nah. Sean's my guy.
Yeah, well, sounds like you're his guy too, because unprompted, he was like, I need to let him know that Georgia's getting a guy.
Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. Well, I'll also say on the modern day side of things, you're not the only Georgia guy with modern day ties. Nate Frazier is a running back in Georgia right now. Georgia fans love Nate Frazier. I think anyone who's ever been around Nate Frazier loves Nate Frazier. But what has he shared with you about his experience at Georgia and why, it's kind of crazy for some people, the idea of wanting to go across the country from California to Georgia. Like, what has he told you about why it made sense for him and why he thinks it could make sense for you too?
If you want to be great, you know where to go. That's what he tells me all the time since the day, he committed. If you want to be great, you got to go to somewhere that's, going to make you great. And he told me all the time, Georgia's that place. And then once I really got to experience, because I actually saw him during the camp, he was like, it's different, huh? I was like, for sure. Reminds me of modern day. He was like, definitely. So he was just telling me ever since, he committed and got there, every time he comes back in town, he's like, it's different. And, like it's similar as modern day, just like how the culture is and how they're like, they harp on winning a lot. And, you just got to be different, got to be like everybody says, a game changer. But really it's just, him talking how different it is from other colleges and how their mindset is on everything they go into. It could be a workout, it could be schoolwork, anything you really do out in Georgia, you just gotta have a different mindset.
What should Georgia fans be expecting from Nate this weekend or this season, anyways?
Oh, and Nate?
Yeah.
Gonna go crazy. He's gonna put the world on shock. He already did last season. I know last season he went crazy. I think he's gonna go for definitely over 1,000 yards. I believe over 1,000 yards, 10+ touchdowns. That's just who Nate is. And no matter what, no matter how he's doing on the field, off the field, he always has that mindset of he's that guy. Like you said, you've been around him. You could tell he's just really a real positive guy, no matter what it is, no matter where he's at. So I feel like he just really brings that mindset on the field, and that just makes him such a great player that he is.
For sure. Awesome. Well, Gavin, thank you for joining the show. You're now transitioning from recruit. I know you're still going to be getting recruited, but from recruit to maybe trying to help Georgia recruit some other guys. You got any West Coast guys in mind that you're trying to help bring to Georgia?
For sure. I already started on that.
Who are you targeting?
Hey, I told Mark and Sean it's never too late. We got Danny Lang, Aaron Washington. We got a couple guys at modern day, not just modern day, but some guys on the West Coast that, are ready to roll. And I feel like that belong at a place like Georgia. So I've been telling these guys, like, you better get ready because I'm trying to get you. But yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining the show. Hopefully you'll want to come on again at some point. We're going to have plenty of opportunities to have you on again. But thank you and congratulations again on making that decision.
For sure. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right, Jordan, that interview was really my first exposure to Gavin Honore. We'd heard about him. Obviously our national team guys on the West Coast had done a good job of covering his recruitment and commitment decision, but that was really my first time getting to connect with him, learn a little bit more about his perspective, what he feels like he's bringing, what it was that he liked about Georgia. What stood out to you from that with Gavin?
Really liked sort of hearing the backstory of him committing and him telling James Coley, and you can kind of tell James Coley was interested and excited to see what he had to share. And then, I think that I wrote about this in the aftermath of him committing, where if you're taking a guy in 2027, he's got to be a really talented, just undeniable target and prospect, and I see that in Gavin Honore. I think that. Very fast receiver, but he's not just a speed guy. If he sticks and comes to Georgia, he's not going to be a guy that his only ability is to go deep and make plays. His sophomore highlight reel, which as you start talking here in a minute, then I'll play for the folks watching on YouTube. But He's diving for balls. He's running really good routes. He's coming across the middle and making plays. This is a guy, he's not the biggest receiver, but he is an all-around receiver. And you think about modern day, I mean, I just don't think you can go wrong with a prospect there. And, talking about Nate Frazier, he's got high hopes for Nate Frazier, but Georgia's done such a good job recruiting out on the West Coast and especially in California. I really like this pickup. And, as long as things go smoothly the next, year and change, Gavin Honore is a guy that I think Georgia fans should be excited about. It's not very hard to watch his film and see why Georgia was, willing to welcome his commitment and take it with no hesitation.
Did you see how, when I asked him about Nate Frazier, did you see how he lit up? Like, I feel I said, even in the question, like, anybody that's been around Nate Frazier just kind of loves being around Nate Frazier. But even when I was asking it, it's like he had a big smile on his face. He really perked up. He mentioned what Nate had to say about him. So not only did Gavin get you excited about what he could potentially bring to the 2027 recruiting class, I think he gets you fired up about what your running back one option is going to be for the 2025 season as well. Look, anytime you're getting guys from modern day high school, you're feeling pretty good. Modern day is as loaded of a football program in America as you're going to find. And Georgia's not taking a 2027 commitment this early for no reason. Like, they're doing it because they feel pretty good about the evaluation. All right, Jordan, we're going to go with arrow pointing up. I will start, and I'm going to first start kind of on the recruiting front. I should have probably mentioned it earlier in the show, but arrow pointing up on Georgia's 2026 recruiting team ranking. They are now up to number 2 in the 24/7 Sports national team rankings, behind only USC. So number 1 in the SEC. USC has a lot of commits in the class already. They've obviously swung big and hit with some major targets like Mark Bowman in the class already. They got Peyton Dyer, another guy that had taken an official visit to Georgia at 1.2. I don't know how that's going to materialize. I know that there are some recruiting narratives around, USC's recruiting class in the summer is not the same as what it's going to be in December. I think that it's a little bit more solid this go around than it has been in the past, especially with them locking down some guys within their own state. But look, if there's ever any questions about whether Georgia's going to have a top 5, top 3, maybe even the number 1 recruiting class, I think that we've now officially reached the time of year where no one's too concerned about that. And I don't know about you, Jordan. I feel like we never even had the panic button moment this year. I feel like the last 2 off seasons, really prior to me starting, maybe 3 or 4 off seasons of, what's going on? Why is Georgia not able to get certain guys? I feel like we haven't really had that happen this cycle. What about you?
I mean, I think other than people being upset about the Jackson Cantwell thing, I think it's been pretty smooth sailing. And, credit to the Georgia staff because they make our life a lot easier when that is the nature of things. So, I think to this point, they've done a good job, and I'm sure it'll get interesting. There will be moments over the next 6 months, but pretty smooth sailing. You would have more to speak on it than I do because you're the recruiting guy. You're the one that usually is getting added on the board when some of that stuff's going on. Yeah,
it's the what's going on. Well, the thing that's going on right now, obviously. Well, I'll save it for around the country. Actually, I'm gonna add that to my notes here before I do it, so I don't forget. My other arrow pointing up. I want to give a shout out to Georgia women's sports. In the last few months, equestrian wins the national championship. Women's tennis wins the national championship. And most recently, the women's track and field team dominates the national team competition in the outdoor track and field national championship. I want to give a special arrow pointing up shout out to Carol Smith Gilbert. She was the coach at USC that had won 2 national championships in 4 years at USC. Josh Brooks, hell of a hire to go out and steal her away from a program that was dominating nationally. At the time, some people said, how crazy is she to be coming to Georgia and taking a job like that? Well, 4 recruiting cycles later, when she's been able to put a full roster together of her own, Georgia wins a national championship by 26 points, which is convincing in the track and field world. Shout out to the Lady Bulldogs out there because 3 national championships in just a few short months, really impressive, needs to be brought up.
Yeah. So when you consider that women's tennis also won the indoor 4 national
Yeah, that's right.
championships, and I wrote about this earlier this week, that is it ties for the school record for most national championships in a single academic year. The other one was 98, 99. So
Wow.
heck of a run for Georgia athletics, and shout out. I mean, the track team, I think they won the championship by like 26 points. I mean,
Yeah.
it was not close. They
Yeah.
deserve major kudos.
Yeah, no, impressive. And look, Josh Brooks, unbelievable hire. I don't know how he pulled that one off. And I don't know what Carol Smith Gilbert saw in Georgia to be willing to leave a place where she was already winning national championships, but she clearly saw something, and she was clearly right. All right, Jordan, all you.
Arrow pointing up. I meant to bring this up at the top of the show, but Georgia special teams coming through with 2 big additions. Wade Register, punter, number 1 punter in the country, and then I'm totally
no. Give it a try. We want to hear you try and say it.
Haran Zurikat is the kicker. Number 1 kicker. So we're a recruiting show, and we don't get into special teams much, but I mean, Georgia deserves a ton of credit. The special teams across the board has been so strong these last few years, and I expect it to be strong again in 2025. But, I mean, go get the top punter, go get the top kicker. Let's just call it a day after that. What else is there to do?
Yeah, shout out Kirk Benedict, special teams coordinator at Georgia. I know more of an off-the-field role at this point in terms of Georgia, how Georgia has divided that up, but someone that is integral to Georgia's special teams. And then credit to Kirby Smart, realizing that kickers and punters are still critically important to success. I don't know if anybody appreciates that as much in college football as Kirby Smart does.
Arrow pointing up, College World Series. Ben, I don't know if you've been watching much of the College World Series. Tuned in to the Arkansas pitcher the other day who threw the no-hitter, and they're interviewing him, and the first thing he has to say is, I shouldn't have hit that guy. If he doesn't hit the guy, he's got a chance at a perfect game. But big win there. I saw Louisville with a walk-off against Oregon State. I love the College World Series. It's so much fun. And, as we're recording this, I haven't checked the score. I saw Coastal Carolina is on a tear. We know some Auburn folks that, they were upset with the way Auburn went out of that series at home. But that Coastal team's for real, Ben. I kind of think they've got a real chance to win this thing.
Yeah, they're a very, very good team. I will say if Gage Wood's on the mound, though, I don't know how you beat Arkansas. 19 Ks, no hitter. I mean, how do you beat that if he's on? If you got a game 3 and he's on the mound in the College World Series national championship, I don't know how you beat that.
Last arrow pointing up, pool days. Had a chance to go back to Jasper, see my parents over the weekend, and spent Saturday in the pool, and it had been a minute. So that was fun, hanging out with the family. My dog Maya got in the pool a little bit, hanging out in the pool, trying to stay cool. You can't beat a nice pool day in the middle of June.
100%. Yeah, I can't get in the pool right now because of my eyes, so you're just rubbing it in a little bit, but I'm hoping within the next week or so that I'll be all good on that front.
Well, first you have to be invited, Ben. But
well, that's right. I don't have any friends that ask me to come to the pool with them, so how would that happen? Was that your last one?
Yes, we're good.
All right. Around the country, I'm going to go a little bit more rapid fire here just because there's a few, and we obviously want to get into predict commit, and I'm hearing a roaring thunder coming out of my back window, and I'm already on a hot spot as we do this, so I don't even know how much longer anybody's going to be able to hear me. A couple of guys that committed to FSU that took official visits to Georgia: wide receiver Brandon Bennett, defensive lineman Tico Crittenden, who I'm now realizing was on your predict to commit team. That is one, Jordan. We've talked in the past about how you're not out on any of these guys just because they commit, because they could flip. That's one where I'm going to say I wouldn't rule it out. We've talked about defensive line. We got to see how it all plays out. If Georgia misses on Valdensona, if they miss on James Johnson, Kendall Guerville, all these guys that we've been talking about, Tico Crittenden still in consideration for Georgia, but a couple of guys that the Seminoles got into their class. I mentioned earlier it's hard to flip guys from Notre Dame. Just before we got on here, Thomas Davis Jr., linebacker legacy at the University of Georgia, had taken an official visit. I had mentioned a couple episodes ago, I didn't think Georgia was going to flip him, but then coming out of the OV, it was like, if it happens in the next couple of weeks, maybe. He gets back to that Notre Dame official visit. They lock him down. He has officially shut down his recruitment. I think that's probably the safest bet of where that thing had been trending the whole time, just in terms of how late Georgia was. But it does complicate things a little bit in terms of what shakes out with Georgia at linebacker. And I'll bring up something else as it relates to that coming up. Dre Quinn, edge rusher from formerly Greater Atlanta Christian, recently transferred to Buford High School. He's down to 2 schools, Texas and Clemson. Hasn't made a commitment decision yet. I would have fully expected him to end up at Clemson, but there's some buzz coming out of Texas. I'm not going to be as tapped in on that recruitment, admittedly, now that Georgia is no longer really involved, but I can say it's not going to be Georgia, and we know Georgia's really all in on Kamari Brooks, who will be making his decision on June 23rd. Maybe should have found a way to work that into arrow pointing up, commitment dates, something like that. I don't know, but Kamari Brooks coming up. Couple players in the state of Georgia that didn't take official visits to Georgia, but I could see a world where if things go sideways at certain positions, we could maybe see them circle back on them. Running back Jerrion Campbell commits to Indiana. Offensive tackle Tyler Chuckuyum commits to Florida, and running back Carson Baker commits to Florida. 3 guys that Georgia was not at a place yet that they were going to bring them on official visits, but like we've said, we don't 100% know what running back 2 is going to look like. We don't 100% know if Georgia misses on Malachi Lee and Fletcher Turk is already committed to Clemson or Georgia Tech or Auburn. We don't necessarily know who they might circle back on. Carson Baker, Tyler Chuckuyum, Jerrion Campbell, just a couple of names to keep an eye on at those positions. And then not commitment news, not narrowing down your recruitment news, not shutting down your recruitment news. But one of the more interesting things I saw this week, 5-star linebacker Tyler Atkinson is taking an official visit to Texas this weekend, not Ohio State. Does he still find the time to get to Ohio State? That I don't know. We've talked about how he's uniquely releasing his official visit schedule a little bit differently. Notable that it is not Ohio State, but because it's Texas, going to scare the dickens out of people until he actually commits to Georgia. I mentioned earlier, we've got people on our board that are constantly tagging me up in arms about certain things. Just the fact that Tyler Atkinson is taking a visit to Texas has people in full meltdown mode, which I get it. Justice Terry PTSD syndrome is going on, but guys, let's please just let this thing play out a little bit. All right. We knew he was going to take 4 official visits, all 4 of the main weekends of June. That is not a newsflash. It's maybe a little bit surprising that it was Texas. I think it probably alarms people a little bit that he's been doing some summer workout stuff in Texas. Maybe I'm being naive in saying that that was always part of the plan and they wanted to get him out of the state so that he could get what – I wrote about this on the board, but his dad talked to me about this last fall, that they were this summer going to get him out of Georgia just because when you get to the NFL, you're going to be somewhere totally different, somewhere completely uncomfortable. A lot of guys go train in LA or Miami or Dallas, just different places. And it's a different life experience that Tyler's never really had. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe they wanted to get that out-of-state experience because he's going to be going to college out of state. I don't see it that way. I think that it's a situation where they just wanted to use this offseason to almost professionalize what an offseason would look like for Tyler. And it just so happens that because he's been in Texas, it's made him a little bit more accessible to Texas. Again, maybe naivety on my part, but I'm still feeling like Georgia is the team to beat despite any, fears that people are having right now. Maybe I'll feel differently about that next week, but as of right now, I still like where Georgia is.
Ben, we thought that was thunder outside. It's not thunder. It's a stampede of Longhorns. They're coming into Georgia and they're taking all the players, man. I'm with you. And honestly, I can understand the Justice Terry piece of this, but I would kind of more look at it on a positive side if I'm a Georgia fan and saying we kind of thought Ohio State was the top competition and they're not even getting an official visit. So, maybe again, that's me spinning it, but I don't know that it's necessarily terrible news. People are always going to be concerned with recruitments like these. And the thing that annoys me, and you know this, because we live in a different financial world of how this is done, everyone acts like when these things are happening, it's just like the end of the world, full meltdown mode.
guys that Georgia really wanted used to take official visits to Texas and end up at Texas too. It's not the first time in the world that this type of stuff has happened. Save the meltdown until he actually commits to Texas. Why don't we? Like, if he was going to Ohio State this weekend, all the same people would have been saying, I'm worried about Ohio State. I don't feel good about what Ohio State might be doing here. Like, look, he was going to take 4 official visits. Georgia was always going to be one of them. I personally think the fact that he was on an official visit weekend the same weekend that Jared Curtis was coming on an official visit weekend is a good thing, because Georgia was strategically trying to make that June 13th to 15th weekend one of camaraderie for guys that I think they were feeling pretty good about. But we'll see. Maybe we'll have a different conversation about this next week, but that's also a recruitment where we might be waiting until late July, August before we know for certain. All right, predict to commit, Jordan. I don't know how many more of these we have because we're running out of options. We're running out of time even where the guys are going to be uncommitted. So I might have to get creative in terms of how we implement this once we go back to our 2 a week or one, or not 2 a week. Sorry,
I was going to say, if we're going 2 a week, my goodness,
nobody needs to Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show 2 a week. God bless them. That they would get tired of my voice way too quickly. If once we get back to going to every other week, I might have to change how we implement the predict to commit. We might not do it every episode. I might have to spring some things on you and get creative. I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. But for this episode, I'm going to go, obviously, as usual, I'm going to go through who's on our teams, how we're faring. We're going to predict one apiece. It is not exclusive to this upcoming official visit weekend. It is any player that you want to pick. They have officially visited Georgia. They haven't officially visited to Georgia. You get to decide. It can be any player that you would so choose. And I will let you go first as well. But let me go through the teams. You've got 3 correct right now: Jared Curtis, Carter Lucky, and Jordan Smith. Your incorrect options up to this point are Mark Bowman, Jared Smith, and Tico Crittenton. You do have some good news coming on your team. I'll say that. There's at least one, I think 2 of your team that I would consider locks as we're sitting here right now. But just going through your team: running back Derek Cooper, linebacker Tyler Atkinson, outside linebacker Kamari Brooks, defensive lineman PJ Dean, wide receiver Craig Dandridge, defensive lineman James Johnson, tight end Caden Prothrow, offensive lineman Desmond Green, Ole Miss linebacker commit Isaiah Williams from Flip a Commit, defensive lineman Vodney Cleveland. Could you hear that?
Yes,
defensive lineman Vodney Cleveland, and wide receiver Terrius Favors. Am I missing anyone from your team? Do you know? I think that was everyone.
That sounds right. And I'm just going to act like where it thundered there was the giveaway of whoever, you were just hinting at. So people rewind at 20, 15, 30 seconds. I don't even know who you said them, but I'm just going to pretend that's the giveaway. Those are the guys that are going to be right in my predicament.
That's right. I'm using Mother Nature for some hints here. I've been on a little bit of a roll. I don't want to, I don't like to pat myself on the back, Jordan, but I've been on a little, on a little bit of a roll recently. All right.
Yeah.
6 commits so far in the class for me. That is offensive lineman Graham Houston, defensive back Zach Fort, wide receiver Ryan Mosley, defensive back Justice Fitzpatrick, offensive lineman Zyke Helton, and offensive lineman Ekene Ogboko most recently. We're even at 3 misses up to this point, though, as I've said in the past, there's at least 2 more on my team that I know I don't got a shot with. And so I've got offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell was a miss, defensive back Peyton Dyer was a miss, and defensive lineman Whitley Cadeau, sort of in that Tico Crittenton conversation, though, where I could see Georgia circling back on Whitley Cadeau at some point in time. The rest of my team: running back Jay Lamar, offensive lineman Malcolm Gaston, defensive back Tyreek Green, offensive lineman Brett Collegier, defensive lineman Ernest Rankins, Alabama offensive line commit Chris Booker, cornerback Chase Calicut, and defensive lineman Valden Sone. We're going to find out a lot of answers on both of our teams here by the end of June, early July. For you, Jordan, I will let you go first. Any predicted commits you want from any weekend, or maybe Georgia's not even recruiting them yet. I'll just give you free reign to pick whoever you want.
I'm going to swing for the fences. And
I was going to swing for the fences.
There were two guys that I was looking at here, but I'm just going to go ahead and be bold, and I'm going to pick Malachi Lee. I'm going to pick the offensive tackle from Honolulu. I went back and forth, Ben, between him and Fletcher Turk. Fletcher Turk from Hebron. He's the one that I would think if they don't get Malachi Lee, that's who they would go get. But just the fact that we talked about earlier in this episode, Georgia's just hanging around in this recruitment. And I'm really watching Michigan and Alabama when it comes to this group. But I don't know. I'm going to swing for the fences and see what I can do with Malachi Lee. 6'6", 318 for the folks who are not watching as I got this pulled up on our 24/7. Yeah, I mean, I just think after missing Jackson Cantwell and the fact that Georgia's been hanging around and trying to make this recruitment interesting, let's have some fun. I'm going to put Malachi Lee on my team.
I was going to do it, Jordan. I honestly didn't think you were going to do it just because you had been bold on Jackson Cantwell. I thought you might be a little bit conservative.
Hey, you were the one who picked Jackson Cantwell.
Oh, yeah, I was. I got Jackson Cantwell. So yeah, well, you had nothing to worry about. I should have known that you were going to take Malachi Lee. Look at me. I'm trying to put my incorrect picks on your team. Classic Ben. I like that pick. The buzz with Malachi Lee in Georgia is better than it's ever been. I will admit I am still very cautious around it because for obvious reasons. How many Hawaii offensive linemen do you remember Georgia signing over the years? Not many. So not saying it's impossible. I just never considered it that likely, but it is likelier today than it's ever been. So I love that pick. And I do regret letting you go first today because I was going to do it. I wanted to swing for the fences as well at offensive tackle. But I guess, look, I just got Ekene Ogboko. I've already got Graham Houston and Zyke Helton. I need to give you some offensive linemen as well. So I can be at peace with that.
I appreciate that, Ben. You're just, you're a great co-host. You look out for your co-hosts, and that means so much to me.
So I'm going to actually go the opposite direction now, and I'm going to go with someone that I view as a Georgia eval, and I think that the Georgia eval is still ongoing. We mentioned him already earlier in this show, and that is Valdosta defensive lineman Corey Howard. As we're recording this, I think that he still has to perform this week in that private workout with Georgia to be able to secure his spot. But in the event that happens, I like Georgia's chances to wind up with Corey Howard in this class. Anytime that Georgia evals a guy during the spring period and then he takes an official visit, works out in the summer, you really got to start taking a deeper look at him. I think that this last weekend's official visit went a long, long way in terms of securing him. And now I just think it's a matter of crossing T's, dotting I's to be able to get him by the end of this week. So it would not shock me in the slightest. Are we going to do one of these next week? I guess we should, because we're going to be previewing a lot of decisions. So we'll do one more next week, and we can figure that out around my travel schedule at the end of the week. But it wouldn't be surprising to me if when we're talking about news at the beginning of the week, if we're talking about Corey Howard. So now that's not 100% guarantee. Still got to get on the field and prove it. You know how important those in-person, hands-on evaluations are for Georgia with private workouts. We saw last summer, J.J. Hanna does that private workout. Georgia loves him, and he immediately goes into take category. And now he has really had a above expectations, exceeding expectations spring in Athens. I definitely think that Corey Howard is someone that could fall into that category. But you might not have to wait too long for that one to be good news if things go well later this week.
Really like that pick. You were sort of freaking out after I swiped Malachi Lee, but I'd say you should feel pretty good about Corey Howard and the potential of him being a Bulldog when it's all said and done.
Well, it's like there's hitting on certain commits. Like, yeah, sure, I have 6 commits and you have 3, but you have Jared Curtis. Like, there is a magnitude of the commits that I'm just saying, I got 6, you got 3. It's like, well, I'm not going to have a quarterback on my predicted commit team, and you are. So I think magnitude of the recruitment matters. And so I was going to go for the swing for the fences with Malachi Lee just because it's one that Georgia fans are obsessed with right now.
Are you telling me that we're gonna have to do class rankings with what we do in the guys we land? I kind of think that's the only way to do this.
You know what, Jordan? It's maybe not a bad idea, because I guess all we would need to do in our system is just delete everyone from the class and then add them. You know what? That's a great idea. We'll wait until we get through the commitment season, and then maybe it'll be like a AP poll champion and coaches poll champion. It'll be a volume predicted commits champion and then the composite score champion as well. I love that idea. That's why we got you, Jordan. You're an ideas guy.
Yeah, there was the BCS. This feels more in line with the BS, but that's sort of up for whoever.
Well, yeah, I think that much has been made clear with some of the wrinkles that I've tried to throw in along the way. Though I think as we will see in retrospect, every time I tried to throw a wrinkle in things, it hurt me more than it hurt you. And I thought that I was pulling a fast one over on you. So neither here nor there. All right, another great show. Appreciate everybody for joining. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, please subscribe, download, give us 5 stars. We really appreciate you. Like and subscribe on YouTube as well. We really are trying to grow our YouTube audience from scratch as well. So please and thank you. Jordan, appreciate you. Gavin Honore, thank you for joining the show. Great to get more insight into him. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, Dogs 24/7 does have a 50% promo going right now until the end of the month. Do not wait until the end of the month because there is plenty going on. I mean, starting really today, it's like 3 weeks of commitments nonstop. Some that are going to be Georgia, some that aren't going to be Georgia, and you want to be a part of it to know what's going on beforehand. Jordan's thrown on his glasses for the final stages of this conversation, so I imagine he's got something brilliant to say.
No, just wanted to end the episode as I started it. But no, 50% off. Come join us on the Junkyard. We're keeping it interesting. Like Ben said, I mean, there's something pretty much every single day. I promise if you sign on, you'll get your money's worth and you'll get to see what we got going on over on the message board.
And now that I think about it, we will absolutely be doing a show next week because it'll probably be Wednesday when you and I get together to talk about it. We might have Corey Howard news depending on how things go. Who knows how things unfold from the official visit weekend. But on the 23rd, Kamari Brooks commits to either Georgia or Alabama. On the 25th, Jay Lamar will be announcing his commitment decision. So sometime after Jay Lamar's commitment decision on the 25th, Jordan and I will do one of these episodes. And then I'm actually going to be on the road in South Florida for a couple of different recruiting events at the end of the week. And so we might even have to do another. I know I'm now giving you like 6 straight weeks of Stay Wolk UGA recruiting shows, Jordan, but I think we'll probably need to do another one the following week because 26th, Chase Calicut commits, 27th, Malachi Lee commits. Desmond Green's on the 26th. I'm certainly forgetting some people that we're talking about here. So there is going to be plenty for us to talk about over the next several weeks. So Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show isn't going anywhere. I am Benjamin Wolk for Jordan Hill. This has been another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast, Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show.